I'm here with Laura Reynolds
Okay.
today. And Laura, I really appreciate your being willing to share your experience and insights. Laura went through a medical transition when she was younger, testosterone and a double mastectomy, and then realized it was a mistake and detransitioned, and now is speaking out about her concerns for children being medically transitioned.
I did not identify as trans. I believe that I was really male. I believe that I had a male brain. I was one of these true trans, believers, true believers. And, I just wanted to be, a gay male and disappear into that world. I didn't want to be surrounded by other, trans people who were, unhappy with their transition, but, didn't feel like they had any other options. So for me at that point, it seemed like I needed to detransition. So that was sort of my motivation. It was because of that. And so, and I hear, trans activists saying, oh, well, no one should, have to, detransition because of, botched, surgeries or whatever. Well, that's how it ended up happening for me. It wasn't because some light bulb went off in my head and I realized that I was living a lie. That came later. I mean, it was really because I realized I was ruining my body, and I couldn't continue having surgery trying to fix it. I actually had a doctor offer to do a third surgery and was going to implant PEC implants. And I said, no way, this is insane. Like, I've got to get out of here. And, and I did. But yeah, so there's the issue of people getting, my mom says she'll bring my son back at 7. So we now actually have another, 45 minutes. Sorry, I got a little off track, but that's good. So the issue of these true trans ideas, which come from the trans ideology, then being adopted by people who are supposed to be gender critical. And then when people who are trying to find their way out of the trans ideology, and it's mostly young people, right? Mostly, young people, they then re-encounter these toxic ideas from the trans ideology that are then in the gender critical space, and it like short circuits whatever development they were making to find their way out of being trans. So I hate seeing that. I hate seeing people posting pictures of trans women who don't pass and saying, oh, well, we know this person is like an evil pervert because they look like a man, and it's like, it doesn't help anyone to post that stuff. And I really wish that they would stop. I can't do anything about it. So you have the same people who will post pictures like that, then at the same time are the kind of people who would support a gender critical true trans person as being one of the good ones. You know what I mean? So it's
As long as
very
they pass.
hypocritical. Yeah, if they pass, yeah. So it's very hypocritical, and it's something that I think is causing some people who would detransition to not detransition. And for people who think detransition or transitioning is just a lifestyle choice, maybe that doesn't seem a big deal. For people who think it's, what it really is, which is, are you choosing to basically pursue destruction of your body or to stop and not go any further than you already have? I mean, which is the way I see it. It makes me really sad. Anytime, some young detransitioner decides to retransition, I am heartbroken. So that's the one reason that I think is very important. But then there's the other thing, which is and this is one of the reasons why I wish that, the gender critical feminists who are mostly, older women, they're not all lesbians, a lot of them are moms. I wish that, you wouldn't have people in that scene then saying things like, trans men should be sterilized, how dare they, want to be pregnant. Well, of course they're women. So why would you, if you're gender critical, why would you, why would you think that a trans man shouldn't be able to, have children? Of course he should. To me, the problem is that the females who think that they're men who are identified as trans men are getting sterilized by the medical industry. So if someone is coming and saying they're gender critical and saying, oh, they should be sterilized, they're not on the same side as me, And so you have that kind of thing, and it's really unfortunate because then you have the rad fems, and will say, well, these gender criticals, they're just a bunch of conservatives, and that means they're Nazis, Can you hear me? It says internet connection is unstable.
You're doing good.
Okay, great. So And it's really unfortunate, because the thing is conservatives aren't all a bunch of Nazis. I've known, you know, wonderful conservatives who are the least racist people, the least likely to agree with eugenics, the least likely to, you know, and they might have some other ideas that someone can disagree with, but it's just unfortunate. The person who's seen as then the bridge builder, and you know I'm talking about a certain woman whose initials are P and P, who's seen as a bridge builder between gender criticals and conservatives, is someone who legitimately has, you know, voiced support for eugenics and made Nazi jokes. I'm like, this is the worst, because this is what all these young people think. They think anyone who's a conservative is some kind of a Nazi, and that most conservatives aren't. And then the person who's supposed to be the bridge builder between the feminists and the conservatives actually, no, why her? Why not somebody who actually, you know, has a moral, you know, compassionate, you know, perspective, which is in some ways conservative and in some ways feminist, and, you know, instead of like the worst parts of both sides, it's like, it's terrible. So then it's unfortunate, because then, you know, these young, and these are people who, the people who I relate to the most are, it's the straight girls who think they're men. You know, it's not all young lesbians. There's straight girls who are identifying as gay trans men. Of course, there's some lesbians who had previously been so confused that they were identifying as gay trans men, they're actually lesbians. I'm not saying that they're not lesbians and the fact that they thought they were gay trans men means they're straight. I'm not saying that, but there are some who are straight. And if they had some, you know, friendships with, you know, relationships, intergenerational friendships with, you know, older women, you know, who were straight, you know, but who were feminists, and who maybe were themselves, you know, gender nonconforming, you know, I think that would be very positive. So it's just unfortunate when that, when, you know, I really wish that the gender critical people would listen more to detransitioners and not, you know, say these things that then scare people off. Because the thing is the young, you know, women who have gone down this path of, you know, transitioning and gone on testosterone and stuff, in order for them to feel like they can detransition, they have to be able to envision a future for themselves. And so I see the real problem with the radical feminists, where there's this sort of like this rebirth of the political lesbianism from the 70s, where even women who are primarily attracted to men are expected to suppress that and only have relationships with women because men are evil, and that's going to help defeat the patriarchy somehow. This is a way of thinking which, to me, is so obviously something that doesn't make sense. But at the same time, like a religion, I try to be tolerant if it seems like it's helping someone. I'm not going to like
actually, I think that that's so important that you pointed out, because one of my concerns is that when I hear some of these feminists talk about how horrible men are and how oppressed women are and how much we're victims, I think it's a wonder every single girl doesn't want to transition, because they're getting this message about how horrible it is to be female. And that's really dangerous.
Absolutely.
And it concerns me a great deal, but we're not allowed, you know, if we say anything about it, then we're suddenly men right activists, or we're supporting the patriarchy. So it is, that's weird, like there's so many different camps, and if you don't completely identify as, you know, one ideology, then it's like you get piled on from all of them.
Yeah, no, it's really, it's hard. It's hard because you know, I mean, I don't experience my sexuality as a privilege. And I'll also be clear, like, I'm not just like, you know, I do not have like a normal, non-deviant heterosexual sexuality. I have autoandrophilia, and I've really, really tried to work on it. You know,
can you explain what that is?
I tried to pray it away. It didn't work.
Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, it's basically, it's a fetish for imagining myself as having a male body. And it's been there since my earliest memories of having sexual feelings before I even hit puberty. And it later developed into one of the main things that led to me seeking out transition. And it's something that is, I guess it's the female version of AGP, of autogynephilia in men, men who have a fetish for imagining themselves as women. Well, women can also have a fetish for imagining themselves as men. I guess because of a combination of biology and socialization, females with autoandrophilia are less likely to cause a lot of problems than the males with autogynephilia sometimes do. But I was awful. I mean, I really, and when I was, living as male, and I passed, I was reasonably attractive. There were plenty of men who wanted to have sex with me. So it wasn't like I was sexually frustrated, and yet I still did things like went into a gay men's sauna that was supposed to be male only and took off my towel just to upset people. So I really had a problem, which is every bit. I mean, I that's why one of the reasons I have so much empathy for these crazy autogynephiliacs. Like I was as bad as a lot of them and worse than many. I mean, it was really not okay, and I feel bad about it. But at the same time, beating myself up doesn't help. I don't do that anymore. I'm very careful in my friendships with gay men to not slide into making, banter, sexist jokes, because a lot of gay men do that. But with me, I will pretty quickly start to get really inappropriate if I would do that. So I just don't do it. And I don't indulge in, I don't look at gay porn. I don't do any of that. And I really have tried to just leave this orientation in the past and think of it as being something that was a phase. But at this point, I've really tried. I think it's permanent. I don't know exactly how I developed it. And that's something that I've speculated about a little bit. I think people can, be more likely to be prone to developing issues like that because of autism and a variety of other things. And then I just came in contact with the wrong fantasy material once I got into my early teens, but it started before that. So it's hard to say. But so the thing is that for, young females who are identifying themselves as gay trans men, some of them are lesbians, some of them have autoandrophilia like me, and it's like a pretty extreme, fetish thing that probably won't go away. But a lot of them are people who don't have what I would consider autoandrophilia, or maybe there's a spectrum and they have a mild case that is mostly self-induced through, reading the wrong stuff, and a lot of, fantasy, and they could, grow out of it. But then the issue is then, how to have a positive sense of self as a heterosexual woman when in the culture, legitimately, even if you don't believe it's an evil patriarchy, growing up as a girl and having a healthy, sexuality, it's just so hard. And for people who've already gone so, astray into identifying as gay trans men, taking testosterone, possibly having surgeries, to try to, come to terms, with themselves as being, female, and also then not being able to find a sense of community and identifying as lesbians. That I think is extra hard. And I mean, I will be accused of being homophobic for saying that, because people say there's no such thing as heterophobia. But when I see young, heterosexual, detrans girls getting literally bullied to the point where they leave Twitter by, can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
It says internet connection is unstable.
I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So there's something going on, and it's part of it is an issue with the philosophy itself of radical feminism, and part of it has to do with group dynamics, especially among women, especially among young women, which was one of the reasons why I wanted to transition. It wasn't just because I had autoandrophilia. It wasn't just because I'd been traumatized by men, which is all that radical feminists want to focus on. I've been traumatized by women,
yes,
by my peer group of girls. I mean, that was actually some of the worst stuff I experienced, and also is what then put me in the position to have some of the sexual harassment that I experienced, because I was so isolated. Being a teenage girl walking around by herself, because my female peers had hounded me out of, their their spaces. And so to see a similar dynamic among young rad femmes, many of whom are desisted or detrans, which is then targeting girls who are straight, who then may either, continue down the path of medical transition, or since they're constantly being told that they're, trad wives, that they must be, these horrible conservatives, they may actually then think that the only way that they can be heterosexual is actually to be a trad wife. And I don't have anything against, people having, nuclear families. I don't see that as negative. I don't see it as necessary for kids to grow up happy and healthy. I am a single mother. A friend of mine helped me get pregnant. I wanted to find a man to marry. I think that would have been obviously better for me, also for my child. But I was reaching a point where I realized that if I kept waiting to meet a man, I probably would get too old to actually have a child. So I went ahead and became a single mom. And since I have support from my parents, it all works out pretty well. But I know that wouldn't be an option for everyone. And I think it's
And one thing
unfortunate.
that you mentioned that was
yeah.
that I think is so important is that sense that that males are being blamed for all the problems that these girls are having, but
Yeah.
but you touched upon that idea that as a kid that you didn't fit in and that your female peers really isolated you. And I think
I was terribly bullied, but I
yeah.
bullied too. I was a bully victim. I talked about that in my Benjamin Boyce interview. Which is why everyone was saying, I'm like a horrible, like malignant narcissist or whatever, because I admit that I did bad things. I guess I should pretend, right? That would be better.
See, and I think that any kid who denies that, I mean, I could easily just pretend to be the victim, but I was very capable of bullying. And and it's interesting that you talked about.
I managed to achieve total friendlessness. Any
Yeah,
kid
yeah,
who wasn't
exactly. Yeah.
became my victim.
Right. Yeah. And I think part of that is that I just felt so I did not fit in. I just did not fit in. And so it was sort of like, well, guess what? If I'm not going to fit in, if you're going to bully me, I'm going to push right back.
Yeah. And I think that's the case for, probably, a lot of, kids who are gender nonconforming. And as people constantly say, most of those kids, if they weren't now getting railroaded into medical transition, they would grow up to be gay. That's true, but not all. And then, of course, you have people who, there's this whole idea of rapid onset gender dysphoria. But that's something that no one will self-apply. Everyone who, thinks they're trans as a teenager will remember their childhood as having been more gender nonconforming than, maybe their parents would say. So there's no line.
Well, and at any point a kid can say, well, I wanted to be, but I was like stifled by my environment or my community. So it's really easy. I mean, we all rewrite our history all the time. That's just sort of part of the human condition.
I will say this though, I was extremely gender nonconforming. I tried to pass as a boy. I tried to pee standing up.
See,
as a kid,
See, and I did that too, but mine was more.
So again, I'm true trans.
Yeah, see, and that's what's so funny is that I get accused of not being true trans, and yet I was the kid who was, at 6 years old trying to practice pee standing up and insisting I was a boy, and I was aggressive, and I was, I was actually put into a special group in first grade because I was so aggressive.
That's basically what I was like too.
Yeah,
and there was obviously something wrong with me. It wasn't that I had a male brain.
Right, exactly.
I can totally how people get flat. I mean, I still, that's the thing is every day I make a choice to not go do drugs. And it's not like I actually really have to think about it most of the time, but that's what I learned in recovery, and every day I also make a choice not to retransition. And I'm not saying that I'm actually considering doing that, but it's a one day at a time thing. And I mean, for me, recovery it's not something that you do it, you know what I mean? And I also know that there's people who, when I was trying to get clean off of heroin, I ended up on Suboxone, and people who are on Suboxone or on methadone, methadone is old fashioned. People who are on Suboxone think that they're better than the people on methadone. But anyway, people there would actually say, I just must have had a chemical imbalance in my brain that made it so I need opiates. I just had this special brain. And like, and see, that's, I guess, one of the things. It's like, I know a lot of people are actually helped by psychiatric medication. And I don't want to tell people, they shouldn't take it. For me, it was bad. For some people, it seems helpful. But the idea that people have a chemical imbalance in their brain, that's something that was a hypothesis that came out of some bad studies that were paid for by pharmaceutical companies, that it was used to market pharmaceuticals. This is back in, like the 90s. And then they figured out that that wasn't true, but nobody updated the propaganda. So now everyone's walking around believing that that is accurate. And I honestly think that that is one of the things that paved the way for the acceptance of the born in the wrong body trans thing.
Yes, I would so agree, because one of the things my
thing I feel
mom
like
used to say to me when
Yeah.
she was trying to get me to take antidepressants when I was in high school,
Yeah.
probably one of the
Yeah.
first generation to come out,
Yeah.
is she'd say, if you were diabetic, you would take insulin. So why won't you take
Yeah.
this? Your body needs it.
Yeah.
And instead of
exactly.
like looking at the fact that I had like this incredible history of trauma and self-abuse and all this other stuff going on, it was, here, take this pill. It'll solve that chemical imbalance that you have. So like you said, it really did pave the way for this idea that there can be these physiological disconnects that we need to fix with medications.
Yeah, and so I feel like it's important to talk about that. And then the other thing that is important, though, is as I'm talking about that, to make it clear that I'm not somebody who is against Western medicine, because sometimes you'll see people who are criticizing transition, and then they're also against vaccines. They're against
any kind of medical,
possible thing, and they have some very strange theories that are really not sound. And I'm not going to try to convince some individual that they need to radically revise their worldview. Like, if that's how they want to understand things, that's fine. But it's really not helpful in terms of trying to do what I'm trying to do, which is to try to help young people to not end up, on the transgender train and ending up, with all this, physical damage from hormone.
Right. If you attack everything related to Western medicine, you lose all credibility.
That it makes it ridiculous, and so that's another thing where I need to cycle back, because there was another thing that I didn't finish clarifying, but that is important. The thing with the straight G-trans girls, I really am concerned that some of them are going to, put themselves in possibly like abusive relationships, because the radfems have told them, well, all relationships with men are abusive. And if you want to be with a man and have a family, then that means you're a trad wife, and you're going to, be living out some sort of a patriarchal structure. So then if they think, well, that's really my only option other than trying to be a lesbian when I'm not, they may get into a relationship like that because they think that's the only option. So I'm worried about girls who may, especially if they've taken hormones, if they've had their breasts removed. I've had a very hard time. I'm still single. I've had a very hard time dating. I've attracted some weird people. I've, attracted some people who were nice, but then ultimately, it hasn't worked out, partially because of, my history, and it's not easy. And when I see young G-trans girls who have a boyfriend and they're happy, even if it might seem like kind of like they're oversharing, I'm happy for them. I hope it's actually a healthy relationship. And then if it turns out not to be, they'll know to leave, and they'll know they can leave, and then they can find someone else. But I wish I could have a happy ending where I have this, great husband, and but I don't. I worry though about girls who are, in a situation where they're actually more at risk of attracting guys who might have paraphilias. They might have pedophile tendencies, be attracted to flat chests because of that, or they might be interested in amputation and be attracted to that. There's guys who have serious problems. So for a young girl trying to date after having gone through what I went through, and the permanent changes to the body, it's going to be hard. And then you have, these radfems saying, well, any relationship with a man will be abusive. So then if she internalizes that, then if she does get into an abusive relationship, she's going to think, well, this is just how it is. It's either this or try to force myself to be a lesbian when I'm not. So I just think it's such a terrible message. But I want to make it really clear, we are starting to run out of time. I want to make it really clear that I am not, and I don't want to just use the word homophobic. I'm not, but I understand that there are people, and I know, I guess you've said you're Christian, and there are people who are Christian who have beliefs about what kind of relationships are moral, which I don't share. I personally think homosexual relationships are totally okay. I think that gay people should be able to get married, should be able to adopt. I'm against surrogacy. I think that the ethical uh, uh, the ethical issues around surrogacy are different than the ethical issues around sperm donation. It just is different. Men and women actually have a different situation. So for lesbian couples who want to have a baby with a sperm donor, I think there are some ethical issues. I think it's better for children to know both of their parents, but I don't think that that's a wrong thing to do. I do think surrogacy is wrong.
Yeah, I'm pretty anti-surrogacy.
Yeah,
And it's
I
interesting
think
because
it's
most
wrong.
of my worldview is founded
Yeah,
in health.
yeah,
What's healthy, what's going to result in
yeah,
healthy,
yeah,
functional, healthy bodies, healthy relationships. That's really where my focus is. And
yeah,
that's why this transgender narrative is so disturbing to me, because it's really
yeah,
advocating harming children's bodies, which to me is just,
yeah,
um,
absolutely.
it's just about as horrible as it gets. And
And
when
that's
you're,
another one of the things with the trans ideology is now that some young people have started to be aware of the fact that transitioning is going to rob them of their fertility, and now the fertility industry, which is super evil, is jumping in and saying, oh well, we'll just freeze a little piece of your ovary, and then when you're an adult, and you can have a surrogate carry your child. So it gives these kids this false hope, and so then they're
it
going
also
to
just
end up
promotes this like
um,
really
the
dysfunctional
industry,
view of
which
our
most of them will
bodies.
never be able to afford it anyway,
Yeah.
and I can't imagine what that would have been like for me if I had lost my ovaries, but I knew I had frozen eggs somewhere that I was paying rent for to keep them frozen. And then my only way to have a child would have been to get a surrogate if I could afford it. That would be such a horrible moral dilemma to be in. And I just think it's really important, and the thing is there are some trans people who are like, they've been saying, oh, well, maybe fertility is important, but they then pretty quickly get confused by the trans rhetoric. And they either try to say, oh, well, we'll just take care of it with the fertility industry, or you have, people saying, no, I'll keep my ovaries and uterus and I'll have a baby, the natural way and still be a man. And what they don't realize is that the testosterone causes atrophy, and there might be, more and more trans men who've been on testosterone having babies, but that doesn't mean that all females who take testosterone, or even the majority, will.
Especially
I
if you've
mean,
been
I
on puberty
honestly, I
blockers,
developed a
because if you
pelvic
start
organ
puberty
prolapse.
blockers, if you're on
And
puberty
yeah, I think
blockers
in
and
that
then
case,
on
we pretty much know
testosterone,
for sure that
yeah,
the organs don't fully
right,
develop, and also the eggs or sperm don't fully develop.
right,
And females are born with all their eggs, but they're not fully
fully
developed. They have to
developed.
go through a process to be fully developed. So those kids, and which I think really, I really feel like the earlier people who are at risk of being seduced by this ideology come in contact with it, the earlier they'll transition. So we've
Right.
got all these teenagers now, but I honestly think the next wave is going to be people who transitioned younger, and most of them are going to be infertile, and it's just it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But I did want to say with regard to the issue then of the options for family for how to have children for people who are gay. I just want to make it really clear that I'm not against gay people having children. And I mean, that's one of the things that made me so upset, seeing gender critical people say that trans people shouldn't have children. Everyone should be able to have children, but they should be aware of how our bodies naturally do that, and obviously not taking hormones that are going to damage your organs that are responsible for that is like the key thing, key takeaway from understanding how biology works and accepting that if you want to have kids. But I also think there's an option for gay men to have children that are biologically related to them, which won't work for all gay men, because some gay men really don't like women. And I really wonder if they should maybe reevaluate if they really want to have kids, if they feel that way.
Because if they have a female child.
Yeah, I mean, that could be really bad. And the same thing for lesbians if they hate men. I mean, if they
Yeah,
hate men that much. And I've
agree.
heard some
Yeah,
say, oh, we'll just abort a male fetus. And I'm just
yeah,
like, oh
yeah.
my God. Like I can't, at that point, I just have to disengage.
Yeah,
You know, but for people who are homosexual because they genuinely love the same sex, not because they hate the other and they're capable of having friendships, I think a potentially very good option is co-parenting, where the gay men act as a sperm donor, but they're not just a donor. They'll be in the child's life. And that is an
that way the
option that I
child has
think
a
more
mother and a
people need to
father.
be.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
exactly. More people need to be aware of that as an option.
so not to cut you off,
But yeah, so there was, what else did I
you
want to say?
only
We're
have
running out of time
you
again
just
now.
have like
I
just a
wish
second
I could
more.
just, yeah, sorry.
So
Yeah.
so as we're
Um,
finishing up here, is there any last sort of words of wisdom that you want to end on?
well, that's what I'm trying to think of. We've got actually, I guess, 15 minutes. So that's enough time to, oh yeah, I wanted to say the thing with the trans people who are like, oh, you know, we'll just keep our uterus and we'll be able to have a baby. And what they don't realize is they're going to end up with atrophy. One of the ways that Buck Angel has gotten himself to be, you know, well known again is him talking about his experience with atrophy and having to have emergency surgery because his uterus like exploded. And so he's then been saying, you know, oh, young trans men should have a hysterectomy sooner so they don't end up in this situation. And I just think that's the absolute opposite message that they need to be hearing, because, you know, I do have permanent damage, you know, but I got off of testosterone. And even though I literally, and I don't talk about it much because like, I don't want to like scare people, but like I have pain every day, you know, and it limits what I can do in my life. It
And that's
affects
from the
everything.
testosterone?
Yeah, because I developed vaginal and uterine atrophy, and I developed a prolapse, which is something that usually only happens to postmenopausal women. But anyway, so that's something I'm going to be dealing with. Can you still hear me?
Uh-huh.
Maybe not.
No, I
Can
can
you
hear
hear
you.
me?
Yeah.
Did that cut out?
Nope.
Okay. So I'm going to be dealing with that forever. But I'm still glad that I didn't have a hysterectomy. So there's this sort of idea of like, oh, well, if you go on testosterone, you better have a hysterectomy soon because you're going to get permanent damage. The only way to avoid that is to take it out. No, I mean, like, I still have my organs and they are damaged. And guess what? I'm still glad that I have them. So, you know, I just think it's so irresponsible for Buck Angel to be promoting that. And the reason he's doing that is because he has a guilty conscience. And the reason he has a guilty conscience is because, like Joey Bright said, he was one of the first like F to M kind of celebrities who really promoted this idea that you could be a man with a vagina. And I think a lot of people, not just myself, I was influenced by him, but a lot of young women who may not have transitioned if they thought that they were going to, lose their vagina, thought, oh, well, if Buck Angel is transitioning and he still has his vagina and it still works, I guess it's okay. And so he, and people don't realize that. They don't understand the influence he had. So he had a terrible influence on a lot of people. And now he's trying to somehow make it good, but probably just making it worse. And
that's actually one of my concerns about the
yeah.
article that Joey Brout wrote. As much as I feel like it's important to call out this concept of true trans, I'm concerned that it's just going to garner more support for Buck.
Well, that's what's already happening, and it's unfortunate. I really wish that article hadn't been published. I think that that Joey had a lot of interesting things to share in the interview, and that could have been worked up into some sort of an article about her experiences as a butch lesbian, through the 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000s, and how the community that she helped build up, that she saw as a flourishing lesbian community, then was decimated. But it was for a number of reasons. I actually remember, in fact, when I, around the turn of the millennium, was first in San Francisco, someone actually who was an older butch lesbian actually said to me that I was part of the problem because I was like stabbing the lesbian community in the back by becoming a man. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I like men, you know? And she was like,
Oh,
but
interesting.
so there were women at the time who were aware that it was happening and they were horrified, but there were other things that were happening too. There was gentrification, which is what had pushed, the bars to close. And then there were these, pop-up bars that she mentioned in the East Bay. And, and you also had this thing going on where there was this kind of, you know, this was before the real mainstreaming of some of the negative aspects of the critical theory and identity politics and Antifa and all this stuff that you had at the time. There was this movement that was supposedly, opposed to, capitalism and how gentrification was destroying, queer community or whatever. But at the same time, they saw as part of that, the push for gay marriage and stuff. So you had these people who were saying, we're gay and we don't think gay people should get married, but we're not conservatives. We're like these revolutionary anti-capitalists. We're against gentrification. And they formed this group called Gay Shame. And this was in the Bay Area. And I attended a few of their events. And then I actually backed out because I realized that even though I was living as a gay, a gay trans man, I kind of knew that I wasn't gay and that it was horrible to be against gay marriage. Of course I would support people getting married. Even when I was that crazy, I wasn't that crazy. But that ended up sort of falling apart. But, you had all these weird things that were flowering in this time when the traditional gay community was sort of dissolving. And then some of the people who were involved in that group, by the way, now consider themselves to be trans. And some of those people, I think, they're self-hating, homosexuals, both sexes, which is the case for a lot of trans people, but some of them I think may actually, and I'm not going to like divulge personal sexual details, not actually even be homosexual. And that's something that, so people can have layers and layers of confusion. And I think, it would be really nice if there wasn't, homophobia and if there wasn't homophobia, then you wouldn't also have then this, can you hear me?
You're still here. You're
okay,
good.
If there wasn't homophobia, you wouldn't then have this, reflexive reaction against that, which then makes it hard for some confused heterosexual people to maybe figure out that they're not homosexual if they think
Well,
they
and
are.
even having such an emphasis on sexual identity, because I have no doubt that if I grew up today, first of all, I would have definitely transitioned and medically transitioned. But if I hadn't had that sexual assault that caused all that confusion, and who knows? I mean, I had all these same-sex relationships as a little kid. I'm sure I would have identified as a lesbian, because nowadays kids are being like told you have to like figure this out. I mean, I hear little kids talking like 8 or 9 years old, whether or not they're heterosexual or bisexual or pansexual or gay or straight. It's just this. And they're kind of too young, as you pointed out. Like even until 25, our brains are still developing.
Kids are being exposed to sexual stuff way too young, and and that's been going on for a while. Not with all the LGBT stuff, but specifically girls being sexualized. I mean, that's been going on for eons. But I think so it's just sort of like another manifestation of that, which really isn't okay. But I guess the note we're going to end on, because we're going to have to wrap up, is just that I really wish there wouldn't be so much hate thrown at trans identified people who like males who are trying to be lesbians or females who are trying to be gay men, because as much as I understand how they are destructive toward the actual communities that homosexuals need to be able to have, there are single sex communities, and I respect that. And, that's one of the reasons why I'm not a gay trans man today. And I acknowledge that, the role that I played at that time was destructive. But at the same time, for people who are still caught in the thick of it and they're, very delusional and they've been affirmed in these delusions and they're harming themselves with surgery and hormones, I wish that there wouldn't be so much hostility toward them. And I can understand why, but, from lesbians in particular, also now there's some gay men, where they'll post pictures of people and mock them. My concern is for the people who are being the most harmed. And from my perspective, that's the people who are having their bodies surgically mutilated and that sort of thing. So, I just really, I wish that people who are critical of the trans ideology would be more careful. I guess that's what I want to say, to be more careful, if they actually care about people who are identifying as trans, and for a lot of them, I guess they don't. But for me, I do, and that's the whole reason why I started talking about this, because that was me. And I also know that I played a role in encouraging other people to transition, and I feel like the only thing I can do to make a living amends for that is to try now to, be a voice of reason and maybe, help people to be less likely to go down that road who ultimately will regret it, because I ultimately think that the majority of people will regret it. That doesn't mean they'll detransition. People stay transitioned, live with regret for the rest of their life. And I think that's something that needs to be, for me, that's always what I'm, thinking about. So
Well, and
thanks for talking to me.
I thank you for your insights and honesty, because I'm sort of one of these people who stands in the middle and sees both sides. And what you just said makes so much sense to me. And I also understand why, rad femme lesbians are incredibly enraged about having penises in their spaces. And so I completely understand both sides. But what you just said, I think, hopefully might add some nuance to that people might not have considered before. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing, all your insights. I think that your perspective is really important because you've lived it. You've sort of been on both sides of the issue and have really important perspectives.